Kill your ego to win in life. Everyone, today I want to talk about something that silently sabotages our growth, ruins relationships, and holds us back from real success. The ego. It whispers, "You're always right." It screams, "You're better than them." And worst of all, it lies, "You don't need to change." Ego is the silent killer of growth. It's that inner voice that constantly tells you that you already know enough, that you've got it all figured out, that there's nothing more to learn. And the moment you start believing that, you stop evolving. Growth requires openness, humility, and the courage to admit that you are a work in progress. But ego hates that idea. Ego wants certainty. It wants praise. It wants to be seen as the smartest in the room. And because of that, it fights every opportunity that challenges your current beliefs, your current identity, and your current comfort zone. Think about this. How often do we ignore advice because we think we know better? How many times have we rejected criticism, not because it wasn't true, but because our ego couldn't handle it? The truth is, most of us don't grow because we're too busy protecting our self-image. When you're driven by ego, confuse ego with become confidence, obsessed with being but right. They're not the same. Instead of getting it right, confidence is and grounded in truth. Is a dead end. It's quiet. Because every time humble, you refuse to be and wrong, always open to improvement. You're choosing comfort ego over is progress. Loud, defensive. You're choosing pride over potential. It sees growth as a threat. Real growth not comes necessity. When you can say, "I don't know," without shame. When you can say, "I was wrong," and see that not as failure, but as maturity. The people who reach the highest levels of success in business, in art, in relationships, are the ones who never stop learning. They ask questions. They listen more than they talk. They surround themselves with people who challenge them. And they don't take disagreement as disrespect. Why? Because their identity isn't tied to being perfect. It's tied to getting better. Ego keeps you stuck in an outdated version of yourself. It won't let you pivot. It won't let you change your mind. It won't let you grow beyond the box you've put yourself in. And what's worse, it will disguise itself as confidence or self-respect, tricking you into thinking you're standing strong, when in reality, you're standing still. There's also this myth that ego is what drives greatness, that you need it to be competitive, to be ambitious. But that's not true. You don't need ego to win. You need discipline, you need vision, you need humility, the kind that allows you to look at your weaknesses honestly and say, "This needs work." That's not weakness, that's strength. That's growth. Every breakthrough in life comes when you're willing to let go of what you think you know. When you admit that there's more to learn, that you haven't arrived, that you're still becoming. But ego doesn't want that. Ego wants to be praised for what you've already done, not pushed to do what you haven't yet dared. So if you want to grow, truly grow, you have to silence the ego. You have to stop needing to be the smartest, the most admired, the most validated. Instead, start being the most teachable, the most curious, the most honest with yourself. The moment you kill your ego is the moment you free yourself. And in that space, growth can finally begin. Ego is one of the biggest reasons relationships fall apart. Not just romantic ones, but friendships, family bonds, and professional connections too. It's the voice inside that says, I don't need to apologize, or I'm not backing down, or I'm right and they're wrong. And that mindset slowly, sometimes silently, erodes the foundation of even the strongest relationships. At the heart of every meaningful connection is mutual respect, understanding, and the willingness to listen. Truly listen. Without trying to win or dominate. But ego turns conversations into battles. It turns differences into threats. When you let your ego take the lead, you stop seeing the other person as a human being with valid thoughts and feelings. Instead, you see them as an opponent, someone you need to prove wrong, or someone who needs to admit you're right. In that moment, love is replaced by pride, and connection is replaced by conflict. Ego makes it incredibly hard to say two simple words, I'm sorry. Because apologizing means taking responsibility. It means admitting you might have hurt someone, even if it wasn't your intention. Ego sees that as weakness. It wants to be blameless. But relationships thrive not because people are perfect, but because they're willing to own their imperfections. A genuine apology can heal wounds. Ego, on the other hand, just deepens them by pretending they don't exist. It also makes forgiveness difficult. Ego holds on to grudges like trophies. It says, they don't deserve my forgiveness, or if I forgive, I'm letting them win. But forgiveness isn't about letting the other person off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from bitterness. Relationships can't grow when resentment is allowed to stay, and ego loves resentment because it feeds on it. Humility, however, feeds on grace, on letting go, on choosing peace over pride. Ego also stops us from being vulnerable, and vulnerability is the glue that binds people together. To be vulnerable means to open up, to say what you truly feel, to admit you're scared, hurt, or confused. But ego sees vulnerability as dangerous. It tells you to keep your guard up, to act like you're unaffected even when you're breaking inside. That creates distance. Because when two people are both pretending to be fine, neither of them can truly connect. It becomes a performance instead of a partnership. In everyday life, ego shows up in small but powerful ways. Interrupting instead of listening, needing to always have the last word, turning constructive feedback into personal attacks, or refusing to celebrate someone else's success out of jealousy. All of these things chip away at trust. And trust, once damaged, is hard to rebuild. What's ironic is that ego makes us act in ways that push people away, while convincing us that we're protecting ourselves. It says, don't get too close, or don't let them take advantage. But what we're really doing is isolating ourselves. Because no one wants to be close to someone who's always right but never real, who's proud but never present, who's guarded but never grateful. Strong relationships are built on empathy, communication, and the willingness to grow together. That requires putting ego in the back seat. It means listening without preparing your defense. It means loving without keeping score. And it means choosing connection over control. Feedback is one of the most powerful tools for personal and professional growth. Yet, it's also one of the hardest things for people to receive. Why? Because of ego. The ego hates feedback. It doesn't matter if the feedback is kind, constructive, or even meant to help. The ego interprets it as criticism, as an attack on our self-worth. And so we reject it, deny it, or get defensive. In doing so, we miss the very thing that could make us better. Ego thrives on validation. It wants to hear that we're doing great, that we're impressive, that we don't need to change a thing. And when that narrative is disrupted, even slightly, the ego goes into defense mode. It doesn't ask, how can I use this to improve? It asks, how dare they say that about me? That mindset traps us in stagnation. The truth is, nobody gets better without feedback. Think about elite athletes, world-class performers, top executives. They all rely on coaches, mentors, and teammates to tell them what they can do better. Not because they're weak, but because they understand something the ego refuses to accept. Growth begins where comfort ends. And feedback, by nature, is uncomfortable. It forces you to see blind spots. It challenges your assumptions. It pulls you away from your ego's safe little narrative and into the real world, where there's always room for improvement. When you let ego run the show, feedback becomes filtered through insecurity. You take things personally instead of professionally. A suggestion becomes an insult. A helpful critique becomes a reason to shut down. And that's tragic. Because feedback, even when poorly delivered, often contains truth. And if you can train yourself to separate your feelings from the facts, you'll find that feedback is less about judgment and more about opportunity. Another dangerous trick the ego plays is convincing you that the source of the feedback matters more than the substance. So you might think, who are they to tell me this? Or, they're not even better than me. But the value of feedback isn't limited to titles or achievements. Sometimes the most important insights come from unexpected places. A junior team member, a friend, a partner, or even someone you disagree with might hold a mirror to something you've been blind to for years. Ego tells you to look away. Wisdom tells you to look closer. The ability to receive feedback with grace is a superpower. It shows maturity. It shows self-awareness. It shows that you care more about growth than about protecting your pride. And once you begin to embrace feedback instead of fearing it, you unlock a completely different level of personal evolution. You start to improve faster. You start to connect deeper with people because they feel heard. And you build a reputation as someone who's not just talented, but teachable. Feedback isn't about tearing you down, it's about building you up. But only if you let it. Only if you drop the shield of ego long enough to really hear what's being said. You don't have to accept every word as truth, but you do have to be open enough to consider it. That's how growth works. That's how you refine your craft, your character, your communication, everything. So the next time someone gives you feedback, take a breath. Resist the urge to defend yourself. Instead, ask, is there truth in this? What can I learn? Because while ego hates feedback, your future depends on it. And remember, the most powerful words you can say in response to honest feedback aren't, "You're wrong." They're, "Thank you." Ego is a master of illusion. It crafts a version of reality that revolves entirely around you, your story, your status, your success, your pain. It builds a mental movie where you're always the star, always the hero, sometimes the victim, but never the one who needs to change. This illusion can feel comforting because it protects you from discomfort, from failure, from insecurity. But make no mistake, it's a trap. And the longer you live inside the illusion, the further you drift from your true self and from actual progress. One of the most dangerous illusions ego creates is the idea that you are more important than everyone else in the room. It whispers, they should treat you better. They should admire you more. You're above them. This subtle sense of superiority can destroy your ability to empathize. You stop listening. You stop learning. You become blind to the value others bring. And that arrogance isolates you. People may smile and nod, but deep down, they disconnect. Because nobody wants to engage with someone who sees themselves as untouchable. Ego also distorts your flaws. It tells you they're not that bad, or that other people's flaws are worse. It shifts blame. It convinces you that you're always justified, always the reasonable one, and that others are overreacting or misunderstanding you. That illusion is comforting in the short term, but in the long run, it stunts your emotional intelligence. You can't grow if you won't look honestly at your own reflection. You can't heal what you won't admit is broken. And ego will do everything it can to keep that mirror fogged up. Another illusion ego loves to create is about success. It tricks you into thinking that success is about appearances, titles, followers, money, validation. So you chase things that look good instead of things that feel right. You start measuring your worth by external metrics. You craft an image, a brand, a persona. But all of it becomes exhausting because deep down you know it's not fully real. And the scariest part? Ego can have you winning in the eyes of the world while losing touch with yourself. Ego also romanticizes the past and fantasizes the future while avoiding the truth of the present. It tells you that you used to be better or that one day it'll all magically fall into place. But real growth only happens in the now. It's in the messy, honest, awkward moments where you sit with what's real and ask yourself, what needs to change? Ego doesn't want that. It wants to keep you dreaming instead of doing, blaming instead of taking responsibility. It even affects how we view pain. Ego says, I shouldn't have to go through this. I've suffered more than others. No one understands me. It isolates your suffering, makes it special, and in doing so, disconnects you from others who are struggling too. But pain is not a competition. It's a shared human experience. The illusion of ego makes you feel alone in it. Humility reminds you that you're never really alone. Chaplini, breaking free from these illusions isn't easy. It requires brutal self-honesty. It means dismantling the stories you tell yourself, the justifications you rely on, the narratives where you're always right and others are always wrong. But that's where clarity lives. That's where freedom begins. The truth is, the ego wants you to live in a fantasy because it's terrified of reality. But reality is where life happens. It's where connection, peace, progress, and purpose live. When you kill the illusion, you start to see clearly. You begin to act with intention instead of reaction. You stop pretending and you start becoming. Ego fears failure like it fears death. It treats every mistake as a personal attack, every misstep as a public embarrassment, and every loss as proof that you're not enough. This fear doesn't just hurt in the moment. It holds you back from living fully, from trying boldly, from risking greatness. Because the truth is, you cannot grow without failure, and you cannot fail freely if your ego is in charge. Failure is one of the most important parts of success. It teaches, it humbles, it builds resilience. But the ego doesn't care about any of that. It doesn't want the lesson. It wants the spotlight. It wants applause. So the moment you face something uncertain, challenging, or unfamiliar, ego says, don't do it unless you're sure you'll win. And just like that, opportunities are missed. Dreams are delayed. Potential is never tapped. The ego wants perfection, or at least the appearance of it. It wants to be seen as strong, impressive, talented. But here's the hard truth. No one gets good at anything without being bad at it first. No artist paints a masterpiece with their first stroke. No entrepreneur builds a billion-dollar company with their first idea. No athlete becomes elite without losses, injuries, or setbacks. Failure is part of the process. Not proof that you're broken, but proof that you're in motion. But ego doesn't want a process. It wants a highlight reel. So it tells you not to try unless you can guarantee success. And what happens? You start playing it safe. You avoid the uncomfortable. You stay inside your comfort zone. And you justify it by saying, I'm being careful, or I'm just not ready. But really, it's ego saying, if I can't win, I won't play. That's not wisdom. That's fear in disguise. Ego also makes failure personal. It doesn't say you made a mistake. It says you are a mistake. It attaches your self-worth to your outcomes. So when something doesn't go your way, instead of learning from it, you start tearing yourself down. You feel shame, embarrassment, maybe even anger at others. But deep down, it's the ego that's bruised, not your spirit. And when you're afraid to fail, you also become afraid to be seen trying. Because trying means risking judgment. People might see you fall. They might not be impressed. They might even laugh. And for ego, that's unacceptable. But for the real you, the courageous you, that's part of the path. The people who change the world are not the ones who avoid failure, but the ones who are willing to fail in front of others again and again, while chasing something bigger than their pride. You have to understand, failure isn't final. It's feedback, it's redirection, it's experience. Some of your greatest insights, deepest character, and most powerful transformations will come not from getting it right, but from falling flat on your face and choosing to rise anyway. Ego says, don't fall. Growth says, fall forward. To win in life, you must kill the ego's fear of failure. You must reframe what it means to lose. Every no brings you closer to a yes. Every stumble strengthens your steps. Every closed door leads you to another one, maybe a better one. The people who rise above are not immune to failure. They're just not ruled by ego. So the next time you're afraid to try, afraid to launch, to speak up, to take the shot, ask yourself, is this fear coming from truth or from ego? Because you'll never know how high you can rise until you stop being afraid to fall.